Hello. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the very first session of GHC 2012 in the Management and Leadership track. And the first session we are beginning with is the Road to Executive Leadership. I'm Deepa Parthasarathy from Cisco. And co-leading this track with me for this year is Mamta Giri from Symantec. We are supposed to, we were supported by a large number of management committee members. And I, definitely want to take this opportunity to thank all of them in pulling 7 sessions for this track this year. We'll be running these 7 sessions between today and tomorrow. And there are 2 rooms exclusively available between Lalit and Ballroom for all of our sessions. In this forum, we are going to be able to connect, network, exchange ideas and thoughts. We look forward to your active participation in making these sessions even more vibrant and exciting through these 2 days. Please feel free to also reach out to any of the management committee members, with your thoughts, ideas, and anything that you would like to share for us to make this even more better for next year. I would like to thank all of you for joining us today, and I will open the floor for a panel discussion on Road to Executive Leadership. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mohana Kamachi. I'm from Symantec, Chennai. I'm here to introduce the topic to you. So, Nivedita Agarwal of CA Technologies will be hosting this session along with her esteemed panel to tell you something about the topic. All of us here want to achieve newest heights in our careers. We aspire to take up the apex executive positions, the corner office, positions that are at the top business levels and are accountable for setting the business goals and strategies to achieve them and leading the organization from the front. Aspirations on one side, the perception that not many women make it to the executive position makes it even more difficult to achieve. Let's move on with the panel discussion that focuses on women leadership in executive positions and hear and learn from some of our esteemed and accomplished women leaders. Thank you. Over to you, Nivedita.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mohana, for the introduction. Research has stated that we have lesser number of women in exec positions, and I think most of you attended the keynote where Kirtika also mentioned the same fact that we have lesser women in the exec roles. So we'll spend the next 45 minutes talking to our esteemed panelists and see what they have to say about this. So let me introduce you to the panelists. To my extreme left, I have Aparna. Aparna is a managing director at FirstRain India. Next to Aparna, we have Soumitra Agarwal, who is an executive search consultant with EMA Partners International. Next to Soumitra, we have Kiranmai. Kiranmai is head HR AMD India and responsible for HR operations in Asia, EMEA, and Africa. And now to my left, I have Shalini. Shalini is an executive architect at IBM. So welcome to all of you. Talking about what the research says, let's see what our panelists have to talk about that. So Kiranmai, HR seems to be the first starting point. So I'd like to know, how does the executive positions, in technology sector compare to other sectors? Since this is a conference for women in technology, I think most of us would be interested in knowing that.
I think we started, thank you Nivedita for the introductions and also a session on Road to Executive Leadership. We started off this morning with Kirtika's viewpoint as well as her experience sharing, where we alluded to McKinsey and Catalyst and various other reports. From a statistics point of view, it's abysmal. But I just want us all to step back 1 second and think about why is this so? The reason being, women started entering into workforce much later than our male counterparts. There are lots of historical reasons across the globe. So we also need to put it in the right framework and perspective while we are all very anxious and concerned about the fewer women at the top of the executive or whatever you consider as the hallowed portals. With that, the question from Nivedita is, hey, what is it which is making technology industry different, or is it similar to all other verticals? We have some very interesting case studies in India alone, if I zoom in. Please look around and see who is at the helm of affairs of banking industry today, private banking. Name ICICI, name HSBC, name Axis Bank. I don't have to name them, they're all phenomenal women leaders heading. That means there has been a silent revolution happening in one of the verticals wherein women have really taken the lead, or they have been recognized to have the potential to lead. So we have to go back to the drawing board and look at what happened at the entry level of women entering into those verticals or industry, and how or what kind of initiatives from a diversity and inclusion happened in that particular industry vertical to allow women to really move up the value chain and get into executive roles quicker than other industries. So coming back to our technology segment or sector, which all of us are part of, very clearly we have a great opportunity to leverage and learn from the best practices of one of the industry verticals I just mentioned. What do we do and how do we? Because entry level, the good news is we have more women entering at an entry level into this industry segment, technology sector, more than several other industry verticals. But how are we leveraging and helping women really grow up the value chain is where we all have work to do. So every single one of you is positioned to really move up, but how do you milk that is what we will learn more.
Thank you, Kiran. So over to Soumitra. So Soumitra, you are a recruitment specialist and have an extensive experience in hiring top-notch professionals from the organizations. My question to you is, when you get a request to submit profiles for an executive position, do you look for the top 5 or 10 profiles that match your search criteria, or you try to search and provide a diverse pool of candidates?
Well, I guess usually it's most definitely the top 5 profiles which meet the client's criteria. So it's obviously about, it's obviously about finding the best talent available for the client, right? Unless there is a very specific diversity requirement, but usually it's just the top 5, and irrespective of the gender.
So do you see a change in trend there? I mean, are there more companies that are asking for a diverse pool of candidates? Is diversity a part of ask?
Diversity is a part of ask. I would say it's better than what it used to be in the past. But I mean, in absolute terms, no, I don't think the numbers are very large. And I probably don't even want to mention a figure there. But you see, what happens is it's just about at senior executive positions, because these are critical roles. These are business impacting roles. Companies obviously want the best talent available, not necessarily in the country only, but globally for quite a few positions. So, that's really what the situation is today.
Okay. Thank you, Soumitra. So my next question would be to Shalini. Shalini, we have a lot of women and accomplished women in mid to senior levels, but the ratio gets skewed when we move into the exec position. What do you think are the reasons for this?
We have seen that what happens is that we have a fairly good amount of ratio, which is around 15-20% at mid to senior. But when we go to the executive, it comes down in single digit. So we did a lot of focus group sessions, at least in IBM, and also we talked to some of the folks in the industry to find out that when women have reached the mid-senior level, then why are they dropping out at the executive level? So there were 3 things which we noticed based on the responses we received. One is the perception of women that there would be no such role for them at the executive. So in a way, there is a perception that either the role doesn't exist or they have a perception that they can't move into that role. So one was a perception problem. The other was a lack of clear plan for themselves. So they have not planned that they can reach and what can take them there. So perception and clarity of plan, etc., is something which we can work upon. So for organizations, there have been several programs which each and every organization is doing, and even here in GHC, we are targeting various sessions where we can clear the perception that yes, there are roles, there is growth forward available, and even for clarity of plan. But the third thing which we noticed was lot of women above senior level, it's a matter of choice, right? So women feel when they are in late 30s that they have a choice now whether they want to go still further, and they have realized their capabilities by that point of time. They know they can reach a higher level, but they choose not to move ahead. And the choose not to move ahead is I would say 60% personal and 40% professional. Professional could be because of certain reasons which they see in the organization, but a lot dependent on because they want to do something else on their own. They feel that they've proven themselves in that particular field and they want to move somewhere else. So it's a choice which they exercise, and that's the reason they are not moving into executive leadership position. We also talked to a lot of executive leaders, and they also confirmed and said that they choose to move ahead. They took a conscious decision that this is the most important thing in their life, that they want to prove either to themselves or to other factors outside them, and that's the reason they are there. So at the executive position, I think it's a matter of choice, and there are women who want to break the barriers at the mid-level, and they can definitely do that, and when they do that, then they definitely are there in the executive position.
Thank you, Shalini. And I would come to this point of individual's interest in some time. My next question is to you, Aparna. Along the same lines, what do you think are some of the derailing factors affecting accomplished women and senior levels, and who can be very good candidates for these exec roles?
So I'll actually give a twist to what Shalini just said, which is when we say that we made a choice to not get into those roles, and because that's something I have thought about and have gone through. And so what I see is that on one hand, I think everybody sitting in this room has actually pushed boundaries. Okay, they have done better work, they have done better quality work, they have diversified and worked on cooler technologies. They probably tried to dabble with different functions. So for example, if you've done core engineering work, you've tried to do some product management, you've tried to do some different roles. So you are actually pushing your boundaries, and you are basically being adventurous about how and what you can learn and how you can do things better. But I think we create some boundaries or notions, what we then probably talk about as choice, which is that, I don't like G&A, I am not interested in finance. If I get into this role, I'll have to deal with, signing a lease agreement every 3 years, every time my office building has to be renewed, and I hate that, right? And so I think there are a lot of these things that we kind of justify you don't like to do. And I would say it's partly true that there will be some roles where there will be part of your job which may not be the most interesting thing for you to do. But on the other hand, if you did realize that you still want to do it, you can always find your complementing team. You can have a team around you who can be experts on the things that you don't personally enjoy as much, or you're not good at, or you want to learn from them. So it's, it's like at a level when you're talking about, let's say, technology, you're making that choice to say, I want to get better, I want to learn more. But, when it is diversifying to some different roles, we probably get a little conservative. And that's been my personal experience till I, consciously got out of it. To say that, no, why am I being averse to getting to know what a lease document looks like? Why am I averse to know how a company gets registered in India? It need not be my core job. I can still do my product management role, but there's no harm in pushing your limit.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, so I think Shalini mentioned a very important point, and I'd just like to add to it from an executive search perspective. I guess for senior executive roles, companies definitely look for people who've done diverse things in their career, because that shows initiative, that shows a growth mindset, right? And even if it is not related to your immediate function, but definitely, clients, especially for very senior positions, want to see people who've done diverse things in their life, right? Because, only then do they believe it places the person in a position to take on a top leadership position.
Thank you, Soumitra. That was very insightful. So clearly, there is a consensus that we have lesser women in executive positions. So, and there are multiple factors affecting this. For the purpose of this discussion, I would restrict it to 3 important factors. One would be about gaps in skills and competencies. The second one about individuals' interest and choices. And third one about, last but not least, it's about bringing in a
Effort spent in learning the new trades of the business which I had gotten. But after 2 years, I realized that there is a large set of people who have really appreciated that the fact that I went out and I took a risk and I still did a decent job. Not a great job, but a decent job. So that itself moved me into a new role, which was a larger role, and I felt that that's a kind of a reward for taking a risk at a point of my career when it was important for me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Shalini and Aparna, for, telling us a lot about the risk taking. And I think it ties in with Kirtika's keynote where she talked about what I'll do if I weren't afraid. So, yeah, thanks. So, Kiran, my next question to you is, now we have spelled out the requirements and all. So, from an organization's perspective, what kind of screening or risk analysis do you do before hiring someone at such a strategic position?
A great question. Typically, organizations, when they start internal, we talk about internal labor markets as well as externally, because especially for executive roles, you start looking in within the organization whether you have someone who is ready to take on that role. So when you look at the internal labor markets, as we say, the risk assessment, as Nivedita puts it, is what is the portfolio of this individual? They could be anywhere across this. So you don't have to look within the same business unit or function which needs an executive. You look across the organization and understand who is the top talent of the organization at a given level. And what has been their career journey so far within the organization, outside the organization, because some of them may have joined at a later stage into the organization. So look at their entire career profile and look at what are those various ingredients which made them what they are today and how is their performance at that particular level or role. And we look at diversity definitely, and we also look at the proactive initiatives and decision making the individual has been able to demonstrate or reflect in multiple instances. So those are some of the very key criteria to really look at who is fit to get into an executive role. Then we look at some domain specificity in terms of what kind of role is it, does it really demand a fair understanding of some XYZ competencies and so on. In addition to this, when we also look out broadly external labor market, what we look for again is similar ingredients, but we also do what we refer to as profiling. Ritika was alluding to the different styles and we really bank on it. For me personally or professionally, I need to understand what's my style and I also need to understand the styles of the others I interact with. So similarly, we look at the leadership style. So there are different tools available. Some of you may be familiar with MBTIs and DISCs and so on and so forth. So we would use profiling to understand what's their style, and we would use interviewing and various other assessment centers is one of those, which is fairly popular. So an assessment is done of the individual's profile, and from there we take on and create an action plan, which also talks about, because every individual will have some great strengths and certain areas where he or she needs to focus. So you will never get a perfect fit. Let's understand that as well, whether internal or external. So there would be a clear action plan in terms of where is this individual going to really shine in the next 6 to 8 months, because 6 to 8 months is typically 90 days, as we talk about, most of the organization talk about a 90-day onboarding for an executive, internal or external. So the 90 days in terms of what is the support which the organization creates to help this individual really shine in the executive role. Because success of an executive is important and critical for the organization, obviously, because the investment you make in finding an executive and moving someone into an executive role is phenomenal. Now, having said that, there is one more piece we all have to understand. When we're talking about executives and road to executive leadership and women leadership in particular, today, the fact is, you take any products or services, 50% or more are women consumers. The reason today there is so much of attention and awareness in really bringing in more women into executive leadership roles is also because you're losing out on a very important market segment, which is women. So there is a business imperative really to have more and more women sitting in exec roles, because they're going to bring into the boardrooms and the exec discussions the perspective as a consumer as well, leave alone just as an executive.
Thank you. So my next question will be to Soumitra. So Soumitra, Kiran just spelled out the requirements, and Aparna and Shalini mentioned how they can bridge the gap. I'll ask you a number question. How many profiles, approximate number of profiles you would have screened and shortlisted for executive positions maybe in the last 1 year?
Lots of them actually, but yeah, I mean,
just a rough estimate.
Yeah, so I can talk about my firm. I don't speak for the entire executive search industry, but our firm would have, over the last 1 year, shortlisted and screened about, say, 500 profiles or so.
And out of those 500 profiles, how many profiles were of women, and how many were actually got selected?
Okay, yeah, true.
I hope I didn't stump you on this.
Yeah, so I will not fudge numbers. I guess the number of women profiles shortlisted would not have been more than 5%.
Oh.
And finally, the numbers which got hired would be even less than that. So, see, again, I think let me qualify that statement. I think it's also a function of certain industries where you just don't have, women leaders. I mean, let's say talk about professions which require to work in a remote location, right? Talk about professions which are, which have hazardous working environments, right? Or you talk about certain other professions where, for instance, late night working hours are de facto. Right? So in those kind of roles, you really don't find too many, rather hardly any women leaders. So it's also a function of which industries are hiring and what kind of functions they're hiring for. And this statistic may change year to year. So it's not something which is a static figure. I'm talking about the last 1 year's average.
Right. So what advice do you have for women employees to, to improve their candidacy for such positions?
Okay, so the advice I have is, it's not gender specific, of course. I think that applies equally to men and women. See, I mean, I think broadly make it easier for the executive headhunter to find you. I mean, look, see, because it's very basic. Now, there are ways to do it. Obviously, one important way is to really be good at what you do, no doubt about it. It's also to, take on multiple projects, multiple functions, take initiative, handle a lot of things in your career. So because, then what happens is that you grow internally, right? Let's understand, if you've grown internally, only then you have better chances of being headhunted by someone. And also, I guess it's all about, just being visible internally and externally and building a network, right? Because see, end of the day, executive headhunting is a profession, we have to produce qualified profiles to our client. And a lot of times we rely on references, right? So, so if I speak to 3 people for references, there should be a high chance of a woman candidate being referred more often.
Okay.
Right? So it's all about building a network, being visible, doing different things, and, actually achieving those kind of roles even in your current organization.
A related question. So how much, when you talked about networking, how much do you rely on the data on professional networking sites like LinkedIn? I mean, do you think that will help women step up the value chain?
Well, I mean, look, LinkedIn is not necessarily the primary methodology for headhunters to find people. That's one of the tools that we use, right? I mean, let's face it, it's an all-income, it's a tool which has, acquired millions of members.
Can you keep the mic closer?
Yeah. And I guess, it certainly helps for you to build a presence on professional networking sites. I mean, this applies equally to men and women, right? But, just because you've built a presence on professional networking sites does not mean necessarily that you will get, chosen for executive positions. A lot of other things have to happen along with that. But yes, that is something which you definitely would have to do in order to complete your, the visibility part of it. But I guess more than LinkedIn, because LinkedIn tends to get very impersonal and, very virtual, I guess it's also important to, network, physically in terms of, let's say at seminars like these.
Right.
So that, just that, more people know what you've done.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, Aparna.
Yeah, I think, and this is a kind of slightly different but important to emphasize, because I see this again as a more dominant pattern with women, which is that if they're introvert, they equate it to not networking well. I'm not comfortable talking to random people I don't know, and so on. So I think just the recognition that that's an orthogonal feature. Okay, and there is no, there's no positive in being extrovert or introvert. You can be equally successful no matter which part of and I'm sure it's not black and white. You're going to be somewhere in between, right? But it's never going to be a blocker for you to network effectively or to be seen, as he said, within the organization or outside your organization. So if you're doing work, I mean, what's the harm in letting people know? And it's not like going and blowing your own trumpet, not at all. It's a totally personality thing, right? But it's something that maybe a lot of us need to do consciously, to say that, okay, I am doing this, or this is something I would like to do. Okay, if I correlate to the previous discussion, I think Shalini talked about, being ready for it. Yes, a lot of us are ready for it, but we will not go and ask. We will not let our management know that, I am aspiring to do something more, right? So it's building the network, going beyond your working team, in whatever ways that's useful for you. It's not like changing your fundamental nature, but it's just getting to be visible, I think is definitely a helpful ingredient, I would say.
So Kiran, my follow-up question is, you talked about grooming talent and all. So what role does an HR play in grooming the internal talent?
There are lots of initiatives or interventions which is integrated into the business planning strategy, what we refer to as the integrated talent strategy in most of the organizations. So what we do is we create the retention of top talent, as it's known as. Part of that is grooming them to be the successor to the next in the value chain. So every single executive actually needs to specify every review cycle, who do they deem to be their successor, and is the successor ready to get into that role in the next 1 year, immediately, in the next 2 to 3 years, or 5 years, and what are those interventions really required? In other words, we're doing a skill gap or competency gap analysis for those individuals who are considered to be top talent at different grade levels within that organization or business unit, and say, spell it out, articulate openly, stating on record, what is it which makes this individual who is considered to be top talent, he or she, really to move up the value chain? And that's when the interventions would kick in, because you have to groom the successor and create that state of readiness, as we informally say, if an executive were to be hit by the bus the next day. So you need an executive to be making the decisions, to be there in the position of responsibility and authority to lead the organization. So you really create that succession planning year on year, and that's up for review, and start creating those interventions from the human resources or talent strategy perspective to keep them ready to go and fill in the role as and when needed. Sometimes it could happen the very next day. And if you haven't thought through, and this goes back to the planning, right, which we're all talking about. So it's not the individual career plan alone, it also needs to be the organizational behavior, which means the organization starts really exploring and looking at who would be the next in line internally. That's why I alluded to the internal labor markets, and I talked about the succession planning, which needs to be really formally laid out, and that's how you groom top talent and create the intervention. So it could be exposure to networks, as Soumitra and Aparna talked about, so allow them to start exploring, give them the opportunity to go meet up different focus groups, or travel to other regions, or meet up with certain teams, cross-functional teams, whatever it takes. So all that has to be started in that capsule, and somebody needs to be a sponsor. So we create that executive sponsor for those, and they champion and drive, so their budget's allocated, because it all boils down to those specifics. So those are the few key initiatives most of the well-known organizations bake in, and diversity and inclusion is also part of this portfolio, where you start looking at the women leaders who are really showing up in terms of initiative, risk-taking, proactive initiatives, decision-making, and then you start grooming them and mentoring them, and create internal networks, as well as help them really get into the larger external networks. GHC is one such great example, where you have a larger pool of mentors or networks available. So many women coming together under one forum and from similar verticals, and trying to understand what works well, what doesn't. And it could be startups, it could be large organizations, it could be smaller business units within a large organization, what plays, what doesn't. So huge experience sharing, not just from the speakers alone, and you get it through your networks and formal value chain. So I think that is what, from a HR perspective, talent strategy companies continue to do, and we have a lot more opportunity to go ahead on that piece.
Thanks, Kiran. That was very insightful. So Kiran talked about succession planning. So I would like to hear it from Shalini. So did you do succession planning? I mean, what qualities you look for in your successor?
So I'll answer it from I'm a technical leader, so
Yes.
I will not answer it from a management structure or management succession planning which is done. I'm an architect, so we design products, we innovate solutions. And in that space, if we have to do succession planning, there are two things which I personally see, and I have seen I've learned it from my mentors and I've seen them doing. First is the vision for the product or for the innovation that you're doing. So is the person able to carry forward that vision and also understands the larger picture? Because mostly in technical areas, people need to understand the larger vision, and that's extremely important. And the second part is, we normally make a mistake. We always look for a person who's like us, right? We want to replace a person who's like us, which is a big mistake. We should actually look for a person who has a complementary skills than what you have given to the product. So if you are a chief architect for a product, you have taken it to a certain stage, and today the product is in some shape, you should always look for a person who can take it to a different level, because he or she has different strengths than you. So complementary skills bringing to a product, to an innovation, to an incubation, to a technology always makes that technology more successful than what it was at that stage. So these are two things we look, and I somehow feel that it's similar to crop rotation that we teach to our children, right? I mean, you're nurturing a crop and you need to rotate it with different diverse skills, and technical acumen is varied in different people. So it's important that you bring in a different, someone might be, focusing on the design and the application architecture. You try to bring in someone from a performance and from non-functional requirements, security perspective, that takes the product to a different shape altogether.
Thank you, Shalini. Folks working in Shalini's team, I think this could be your opportunity. Aparna, I would like to ask the same question to you. You have the management perspective. So what are the, how do you do succession planning? What are qualities you look for? I mean,
Okay. So the first quality, that person has to be smarter. I would definitely go and hire a person smarter than me, for sure. And smarter in the sense of being experienced, more seasoned, with more diverse skill set, all of it, everything that goes with it. The second thing I'll probably look at, which I think was mentioned by Kiran, is the style. Okay, and the style is more with respect to being able to fit into the organization. Because, for example, FirstTrain is not a very large organization. There is a specific culture which nurtures, the innovation and the product development. So definitely the style and whether it'll fit and that person will be successful. But because ultimately the goal is to be successful, to make that person successful. The third thing I would probably look at is that, is it going to open up opportunities for my existing team to grow? So again, I think Shalini mentioned about the complementing person. So not just complementing to what I am good at, but also complementing to the team which is next in line, so that they actually also grow with the new person that comes on board, right? On a soft skill aspect, one thing, if it was a person from within the company, which again Kiran talked about, one specific trait which I would like to mention, and I think the senior management does tend to look at, is organizational maturity. Okay, and what that means is that, let's say I am director of engineering today, and there is a director of services and so on, and one of these are the contenders for, let's say, a GM position or MD position or whatever, right? Now we all know that it's a pyramid, right? So there are going to be fewer positions on top, right? So sometimes you may be ready for it, the management can see how great you are, but that position is just not there, right? So are you working around it maturely? Are you helping the person who is actually on that position being successful? Or are you, showing the grumpiness around, oh, I could do this job and, I don't know what he's doing or she's doing and so on. So I think it's an organizational maturity to complement the existing team, and when and if the opportunity comes, totally comfortably stepping into that role. I think that's one of the key things that, the management would have trust in you there, but you're never engaging in, any action or any non-strategic, behavior which just shows that you're too focused on your own career. I think that's a key thing.
yeah,
I can
sure.
just add, Aparna brought up something we generally talk about. Leaders, when we go out and seek internally or externally, it's great to have disruption. I'm stressing on the word disruption, especially in the technology stream. That means you're really creating something which is innovative, which is a breakthrough, and it's going to help you from a consumer point of view, revenues, everything. But dysfunctionality is a big no-no. So the key differentiation when you're talking about leadership qualities and styles is disruptive is great. That is, you're trying to question the status quo and ready to change everything, and you're going to really, turn around. That's brilliant because but as a leader, you can take the entire team along with you. While you're questioning that's a very, very important ingredient for an executive leader. But dysfunctionality, if you're not able to influence the team and you're going to really de-energize and demotivate, now that's not going to take you anywhere, nor the organization. So that's a critical difference I want all of us to understand and see that we saw more of disruption, which would create better innovation and create the success formula for the company, but not dysfunctionality.
Thank you, Kiran. Organization audience poll. Shalini, just talk about having a plan, So Shalini, you mentioned that if you have a focused plan, you can see where the gaps are, you can work towards it. I'd like to know in the audience, how many of you have a structured plan to move into these apex roles? You can just raise your hand. Okay, so the numbers, you can see, Kiran, I mean, with the, not all the hands here in the air. So what do you think, organizations can do to create awareness, and create, have women incline more towards reaching out to these positions?
As I mentioned earlier, I think a lot has to do with the management and the organization, because if you have to groom talent and if you have to create that aspiration, because right now, especially when we talk about women leadership, the research has shown there is an aspirational deficit. Aspirational deficit in terms of moving up the value chain. Because the other way to look at it is there's a state of contentment women seem to attain much earlier than men from a professional standpoint. So these are the ones which are creating the paucity or the deficit when you look at more women leaders in a given vertical or across the value chain of industry. So having said that, it's the organization mandate also to start really sowing the seeds, going back to the crop rotation analogy, so sowing the seeds and helping those germinate. Year on year, the way we bake in and have those conversations and intense high touch points with the key talent or the critical talent in an organization and start advising and encouraging them to really start posting their career planning, because we do it in AMD. We talk about personal development plans as well as we talk about the business goals and the attainment. So there are two different pieces we look at, and the manager also needs to talk to the talent on the personal development plans, what support the organization can really bestow or draw, or what can the individual draw from within the organization network, and what can he or she draw from outside the network. And that support is extended to the individual employee as well. So I think that's going to really help them really, because it's like a push or pull. Those are the two strategies. Push is when you don't see that aspiration or career planning being done across, then you have to push it through and say, hey, it helps you, why don't you put in a plan? And then we will help you build it and shape it and groom it and so on and so forth.
Thank you, Kiran. I think we'll have to wrap it up as there is an interesting session lined up after this, and I don't want to delay the start of another session. So to summarize, we talked about the different gaps in skills and competencies and how an individual's interest does impact it. And it's all about moving out of your comfort zone, networking with people, and just looking at the different perspectives. And I think there's a need for organizations also to look beyond what's evident and hire more women, in that role. It goes back to the example which Kiran mentioned, that they are losing out on one important perspective of, consumers segment. So with this, I think, do I have time to take one or two questions from the audience? Okay, we can take two questions. Okay, I see a lot of hands going up. Can you pass on the mic to question two?
Shalini.
Okay.
Hi Shalini, I'm Pallavi Agarwal from First Rain. I've been hired by Aparna. So, yeah. I would like to ask that when the time in our age career is to jump from one role to another, at the same time we have personal goals to jump from one goal to another. Yes. Let's say getting married or getting child. So how to bridge that gap, and we have to decide that whether the personal life is more or a professional life is more. Yeah. So how to judge that factor? Because it's a biggest factor which hinders women to grow, to become executive, because we have to take care of our child, we have to take care of our family.
I think this is a very valid question because I fight it every day, so it's very relevant. So I think it's very important that, in any decision, at the end of the decision, are you overwhelmed with the decision? That's very important. If you're overwhelmed and if you feel that you might be overwhelmed, either in professional or personal, don't take it. When I was, and she talked about a plan, I didn't have any plan to start with. I mean, my only plan was I should be able to work after my first kid. I mean, just work, right, in anything. And that's what I thought, I should be able to work after my 2 kids. But then in between, there was an organizational intervention, right? I mean, organization gave certain things to me, and I felt that I'm ready for it. right? I felt, it's only I felt, I was not ready for maybe 5-7 years. I wasn't ready for it. But there was a time when I was definitely ready for it, and it needs push from your family, your spouse, your organization, but internally I was ready for it. So I could take decisions, right? Like I took a role change. I didn't take any role change when my first kid was born because I was completely overwhelmed with the first kid. But after the second kid, I suddenly, my kid was just 4 months old and I took a major change in a role. I changed the location, I changed the role, and I took a very larger responsibility. Where did I get that strength from? I don't know. It's just that I felt I'm ready for it, and at that time I took the decision. So it's very important that are you comfortable with the change, and are you able to manage that change in your mind? If you can manage it in your mind, you can do it. I mean, there is no two way about it. I mean, that's just from my personal experience.
Thanks, Aparna. We'll
thank
take
you.
one more last question. I'd request my panelists to be available for some more time after the session is over.
Hi everybody. I have 2 questions. Okay, so
So that makes it
sorry, just two questions. But okay, so
This
the
is
first
for-
one is
This is for anyone.
Soumitra, I guess Soumitra and Kiran probably. So the first question is that I was just going through this contradiction in my mind. So somebody just mentioned that risk taking is a must to move further in life, and somebody says that being a girl or being women, it's always important to understand our limitations and understand that we are not supposed to get into hazardous situations, jobs that okay, so how do we balance this? How do we find a balance in it? And at what point do I know that yeah, this is a risk that I shouldn't take? And
Just to clarify, when I said hazardous, it's, I mean, definitely doesn't apply to the technology industry.
Yeah.
I mean, I spoke about
Yeah,
certain
sure.
industries where, see, it could be an underground mine, for instance, right? I'm just giving
That's
an
right.
example. So
That's
those
right.
kind of.
Yeah, but working in
professions.
villages, probably working in villages
nature of
like
the work,
Uttar Pradesh, maybe.
Correct.
So this is the social work that I'm mentioning.
Yes, yes.
Probably we might have to research about the data that is available in the villages in Uttar Pradesh, just to upgrade the the situation of the society over there. So probably this data, to collect this data, or being technical people, we might have to go there sometimes and collect the data, understand the data and stuff. So what about it? So for example, yeah, yesterday in the hackathon, we were working on this application that had to manage the data of the data of female children in Africa, South Africa, very backward children. So there are some technical people who are going there and getting the ground data too. So is that the risk that I can take, or how do I know that I shouldn't take it and it's difficult for me? What is it?
I just want to say one thing. A very interesting point you brought out. I just want all of us to think for a second and say, with due respect to spiders, we're all spiders caught in our own web. What I mean by that is, a lot of times, the limitation we talk about, and which is what Aparna, Shalini, every one of us have constantly talked about throughout this panel discussion, is we have this imaginary boundary. While all of you have pushed the boundary and reached where you reached today, we still have to keep testing that, because that imaginary, and it's true for men and women, but in the case of women, because of certain cultural conditioning and certain locations, as you have mentioned, perhaps that leap, that step, that first step you take is going to be much bigger and larger leap than for the others. We understand the shackles we are bound by, because that's why I said the moot point is, when did women enter into workforce in each of the geographies we are referring to, even to talk about why are women in smaller numbers when we're talking about executive leadership, one. And you talk of Africa. I've just been to, in my role, I head Europe, Middle East, Asia, Africas, and India from a HR perspective for AMD. Now, I had to go to Israel because we have some important, activity happening out there. and as the leader for the region, I had to be present in Israel. A lot of I don't want to take names nor the region, were skeptical because I'm sure of late you've heard about the bombings and the situation has become much more tense because it was a little peaceful for a while, but again things are enough. So a lot of them hesitated, and I didn't have many takers to actually travel to the region and have those face-to-face conversations with some key leaders. I didn't even bat an eyelid when somebody said, Kiran, we need you to be there. I was only looking at my schedule and the possibilities of me traveling and being available on a given day. And then somebody popped the question. I went in and I came back and safe, everything fine. You see me here in one piece. And I'm going there in the next 1 week. So people said, hey, how was it? It's bombing. I said, yeah. And I said, guys, just remember, I haven't been invited to the Gaza Strip. Right? I visited Israel. I went to those, and there is security. There are other people living there. So we also need to look at it risk-taking when you say it could be external, it could be internal. Risk-taking could be, there are certain things, sink or swim. I'm thrown into challenges which nothing is taught to me in my management days, or nothing is taught to me in the boardroom, or my peer group has a clue. It's a new thing, and I have to be there, take a decision, right or wrong, but be aware of the consequences and say, all right, we've taken this decision, this is the train of thought, and here is why we need to do it.